unsanitary packing conditions, diseased cows, and roach-infested processing plants. These are just some of the reasons behind the most infamous meat recalls in U.S. history. The smallest recall on our list concerns the over 2 million pounds of poultry that Simmons Prepared Foods recalled in 2019. The reason for this recall was that an internal inspection uncovered metal contamination in some poultry items. Thus, the Gentry, Arkansas company enacted a recall of whole chickens, chicken pieces, and tenderloins that could have also contained metal. All the questionable chicken came out of the plant between October 21st and November 4th, 2019, and headed to institutions in 8 states, such as schools, hospitals, and restaurants. The recall affected local institutions in Arkansas and nearby Oklahoma, as well as in more distant states like Arizona and Pennsylvania. While institutional buyers were asked to dispose of or return the products, the worry was that some institutions still had affected products in their freezers. Luckily, nobody reported any mishaps with the potentially affected poultry products. Of the 2 huge recalls ConAgra has on our list, the smallest and most recent happened in 2023, when it recalled 2.6 million pounds of canned meat from store shelves. The recalled canned meat was sold under various labels, including both meat and poultry varieties of Vienna sausages from Armor Star, Goya, and other brands. The canned meat in question was packaged improperly and may have been affected by leakage or pathogens as a result. ConAgra found that some of the meat was spoiling in the can. The recalled cans were packed between December 12, 2022 and January 13, 2023, and had been shipped to retail locations throughout the U.S.
Officials say if you have bought any of these products, either throw them away or return them.
At the time of the recall, nobody had complained of becoming ill. The initial beef and veal recall from the Huntington Meat Packing plant in Montebello, California, took place on January 18, 2010, and included 864,000 pounds of meat for products made between January 22, 2009, and January 4, 2010. The recall eventually expanded to include 4.9 million more pounds of products, bringing the total recall up to nearly 5.76 million pounds of beef and veal products. The recall occurred after an inspection by the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service, or FSIS, uncovered E. coli contamination and unsanitary packing conditions that didn't follow the company's food safety plan. One employee even pleaded guilty in 2015 to providing the FSIS with falsified documents that claimed the company's meat was E. coli free. Once it became clear the company's food safety records were unreliable, at least as far back as a year, the recall expanded to cover everything produced in that period. Nobody was reported to have become ill due to the contamination. The plant is now permanently closed. The most recent meat recall on our list happened when 7.2 million pounds of Boar's Head deli meats were removed from shelves starting on July 26, 2024, after a Listeria monocytogenes outbreak. What began with the Maryland Department of Health finding Listeria on a liverwurst sample turned into a larger recall as more people became sick. The recall initially concerned 207,528 pounds of product produced in the company's Virginia plant at the same time as the tainted liverwurst sample, between June 11th and July 17th, 2024. It soon extended to products from May 10th and after, and came to include 71 total products. As of September 2024, the Listeria outbreak caused 59 reported illnesses in 19 states.
So really understanding the health implications here is so important.
Of those who fell ill, all required hospitalization and 10 died. The recall of beef processed at the Rancho Feeding Corp slaughter facility in 2014 was nothing less than a nightmare. No matter how well ranchers took care of their cattle before slaughter, the fact that they passed through the Rancho Feeding Corp facility made them suspect because healthy cows weren't separated from diseased cows. The recall involved everything that went through the facility for nearly a year between January 1, 2013 and January 7, 2014. After an employee provided a tip that the facility was slaughtering diseased and potentially cancerous cattle, the USDA raided the premises. It turned out that the company had been slaughtering diseased cows after closing time, when there weren't any USDA inspectors around. Several employees and the owner of Rancho Feeding Corp were sentenced to prison terms for their role in the cover-up. After the recall, scandal, and imprisonments, Rancho Feeding Corp closed down, and the empty facility was purchased by another company. While the recall carried a high health risk, nobody appears to have become sick from tainted meat. While some of the recalls here produced no reported illnesses, or at least relatively few, the Salmonella Newport outbreak at JBS Tolleson in 2018 left hundreds ill. In total, the company recalled over 12 million pounds of beef. The recall covered meat packaged between July 26th and September 7th, 2018. The meat had gone out to over 100 retailers, and customers were asked to either throw the beef away or return it to the store.
The most important thing that people can do is throw away any raw beef products that they have associated with this outbreak.
People started getting sick on March 22nd, 2018, with the last reported illness on March 22nd, 2019, meaning the outbreak lasted a staggering year before it was under control. Ultimately, 403 people in 30 states fell ill. Of those, 117 were hospitalized, though no deaths were reported as a result of the outbreak. It took nearly 20 people succumbing to E. coli before the illnesses were traced to ConAgra Beef Company in Greeley, Colorado, in 2002. What started out as a 354,200-pound recall of meat on June 30th, 2002, increased to 18.6 million pounds of ground beef and beef trimmings by July 19, 2002. The recall happened after the FSIS found E. coli in a beef sample at the Greeley plant on June 19th, and were able to trace 18 cases to the very same strain of E. coli. The recalled meat was produced between April 12th and July 11th, 2002. The first E. coli symptoms started cropping up in consumers on June 1st, 2002. A total of 18 became sick, 7 were hospitalized, and 5 developed a type of kidney failure called hemolytic uremic syndrome. However, none died. The Tops Meat recall began on September 25, 2007, and was for 331,582 pounds of frozen hamburger patties and 21 other beef products. The plant that produced the meat was in Elizabeth, New Jersey, but illnesses caused by E. coli contamination spread through New Jersey and 7 other states, including New York and Florida. By September 29th, the recall reached 21.7 million pounds of products sent out to grocery retailers and institutions across the U.S. The recall expanded because the company didn't have good process controls throughout its plant to ensure that other meat was safe. What's more, the company often carried meat from one day over to the next, which made it more difficult to trace and stop the contamination. All told, 40 people became sick due to the outbreak between July 5th and September 24th. 2007. At least 21 were hospitalized, though nobody died. The small 67-year-old meat company was completely sunk by the recall and closed permanently shortly after the recall. The earliest large meat recall on our list happened between July and August of 1997, when Hudson Foods recalled 25 million pounds of ground beef that had gone to a variety of stores and restaurants. It began small, with just 20,000 pounds of meat in the first recall. However, it expanded to 1.2 million pounds, and again to 25 million pounds when the Columbus, Nebraska plant realized more meat might be contaminated with E. coli than originally thought. Like with the Tops Meat recall, Hudson Foods contaminated multiple batches by carrying over meat from one production day to another. Thus, E. coli could contaminate many more products in a long, continual chain. A total of 15 people who had eaten infected meat from Hudson Foods became sick between June 14th and July 14th, 1997, while 5 were hospitalized. None developed kidney failure or died. This recall also inspired new federal food safety protocols in 1998. There was no doubt that a huge recall was necessary when Pilgrim's Pride discovered Listeria monocytogenes in its roasted chicken and turkey breast products, as well as its pre-cooked deli-style chicken. The recall started with only 295,000 pounds of products starting on October 12, 2002. However, after finding listeria throughout the entire Franconia, Pennsylvania plant, a recall of all 27.4 million pounds of fresh and frozen, pre-cooked poultry products the facility had produced between May 1st and October 11th of 2002 was warranted. At the time of the recall, the company had already delivered products across the U.S. to grocery stores, restaurants, and institutions, meaning they had to be pulled off shelves quickly. At the same time, consumers were asked to return them to stores. Not only was the recall intense, but so were the repercussions of the listeria outbreak. 46 people fell ill in 22 states between July 18th and September 30th, 2002. Almost all of them had to seek hospital treatment. Of those who became seriously ill, 3 had miscarriages or stillbirths, and 7 died. In 1998, Sara Lee's parent company, Pilgrim Foods, recalled 35 million pounds of deli meat and hot dogs, worth $76 million. However, it was a slow recall even after consumers started contracting listeria. Consumers started to get sick on August 2, 1998. However, officials didn't trace it to Sara Lee for a while, with the recall not happening until over 4 months later on December 22, 1998. A big failing of the recall was that there was no press release early on, almost no publicity about it, and no mention of how large and deadly the listeria outbreak was until January 28, 1999. Meanwhile, over 100 people became sick from listeria in 22 states, ultimately resulting in 6 miscarriages and 21 deaths by January 20th. 1999. At the time of the incident, there wasn't as many food safety regulations in place as there are now, and the USDA wasn't as quick to push for a recall. While there was no proof the company was selling tainted meat on purpose, inspections uncovered old meat and roach infestations in the plant. There were multiple lawsuits, including one it settled with the U.S. government for $4.4 million, and Sara Lee pleaded guilty to federal misdemeanor charges. The biggest meat recall in U.S. history happened in 2008, when Hallmark Westland recalled a whopping 143 million pounds of ground beef. While nobody became ill or died, it was still a big deal. The recall happened after the Humane Society released a video on January 30th, 2008, revealing sick cows receiving cruel and inhumane treatment at Hallmark Westland. Some were so sick they couldn't walk.
They're called downer cows, cattle too sick to walk.
Because of the risk of mad cow disease, the law required that federal veterinarians should have been called to determine if the cows were safe to be sold for consumption. However, they weren't. While most of the meat in the recall had likely already been eaten, officials still needed to sound the alarm for safety's sake. The February 17, 2008 recall covered all beef products the company had produced for the last 2 years, assuming that some people might still have some in their freezer. Despite the lengthy time period, it was deemed a Class 2 recall, which meant that there wasn't a huge worry about consumers becoming sick. However, 2 employees were fired and charged with felony and misdemeanor animal cruelty charges. Ultimately, the Chino, California company declared bankruptcy.